The crystal chandelier above table 7 caught every gasp in the room and held it suspended in midair. 10-year-old Lucas Montgomery stood frozen between the white-clothed tables of the Sterling Club, his small hands gripping the edges of his motorized wheelchair. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but in the sudden silence of San Francisco's most exclusive private dining room, it carried like a bell. "Will you sing with me?" The question was directed at Diana Johnson, the club's only black chef, who stood in the doorway to the kitchen holding a tray of artfully plated dishes, her body gone rigid with shock. Lucas's father, Richard Montgomery, venture capitalist, tech mogul, and one of the richest men in the country, rose so quickly his chair scraped against the marble floor. The sound was like a knife cutting through fabric. "Lucas, sit down. Now." His voice was low, controlled, deadly. But Lucas didn't move. His dark eyes remained fixed on Diana, whose face had become an unreadable mask. Around them, the Friday night dinner crowd, tech executives, old money socialites, political power brokers, watched with the hungry fascination of spectators at a gladiator match. Club director Richard Pemberton materialized from nowhere, his face flushed beneath his silver hair. "Mr. Montgomery, I apologize profusely for this disturbance." Chef Johnson returned to the kitchen immediately. "But the music," Lucas said, his voice stronger now, pointing to the grand piano in the corner where moments before, a musician had been playing Gershwin. "She was singing along. I heard her. It was beautiful." The silence that followed was suffocating. Diana had been humming, just barely under her breath, a harmony to Summertime that she thought no one would notice as she'd stepped out to survey the dining room. But this child, this beautiful child in his wheelchair with his 2 large eyes and his unfiltered honesty, had heard her, had recognized something in her voice that drew him in. Richard's hand clenched around his wine glass. "Lucas has a condition," he announced to the room, his voice clinical. "He doesn't always understand social boundaries. I apologize for the disruption." Something flickered across Lucas's face. Hurt, then recognition, then a terrible resignation that no 10-year-old should wear so easily. Diana watched that transformation and felt something inside her crack open. She set down her tray. "Mr. Montgomery," she said quietly, "your son doesn't have a condition. He has ears." The room drew in a collective breath. "Excuse me." Richard's voice could have frozen water. Diana looked at Lucas, then back at his father. "He asked me a question. It would be rude not to answer." She turned to the child. "I can't sing with you here, sweetheart. I'm working. But thank you for the kindest compliment I've received in a long time." Lucas's face began to crumble. "However," Diana continued, reaching into her chef's coat pocket and pulling out a plain white card, "if your dad brings you to the West Oakland Community Center on Saturday mornings, there's a music program. Lots of kids your age. We sing all kinds of songs. You'd be welcome there." She placed the card on the table in front of Richard, whose face had gone from angry to something more complex. Shock, perhaps, or the beginning of shame. "Chef Johnson." Pemberton's voice cracked like a whip. "You're terminated. Effective immediately. Collect your things and leave." Diana nodded slowly, as if she'd expected nothing less. She untied her chef's coat with steady hands, folded it with care, and set it on the tray with the dishes. Then she looked at Lucas one more time. "You have a gift for hearing what others miss," she told him. "Don't let anyone tell you that's a condition. That's a superpower." As she walked toward the kitchen entrance, her head high and her shoulders back, the silence in the room transformed. It was no longer the silence of shock, but of witnessing something that made people profoundly uncomfortable. The sight of a woman losing her livelihood and somehow, impossibly, maintaining her dignity. Lucas watched her go, then looked at his father with an expression that was far too old for his face. "Why did you say I have a condition?" he asked quietly. "Why didn't you just say I have cerebral palsy?" Richard Montgomery, who had built an empire on perfect presentations and flawless execution, had no answer. The Tesla pulled up outside the Embarcadero office tower at exactly 9 a.m. on Monday morning. Richard had sent the message Sunday night. "Ms. Johnson, my office. 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll make it worth your time." Diana had almost deleted it. She'd spent Saturday morning at the community center as usual, teaching music to kids from the neighborhood. Some with disabilities, some without, all of them hungry for something the world wasn't giving them. She'd spent Saturday afternoon updating her resume and Sunday filing for unemployment. But Lucas's face kept appearing in her mind. That look of betrayal when his own father had reduced him to a condition, in front of a room full of strangers. So here she was. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and a practiced smile, directed her to the 18th floor. The elevator was glass on one side, offering a view of the bay that probably cost more per square foot than Diana's entire apartment building. Richard's assistant, a nervous man in his 20s, led Diana through a maze of glass-walled conference rooms and open-plan workstations where young people in expensive casual wear typed intensely at standing desks. "He's running a few minutes behind," the assistant said, gesturing to a chair outside Richard's corner office. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? We have a barista." "I'm fine, thank you." Diana sat and waited, watching the assistant's fingers twitch toward his phone, then away, then back again. The young man clearly wanted to ask something but didn't dare. Finally, "Is it true you got fired for talking back to Mr. Montgomery?" "I got fired for treating his son like a person." The assistant's eyes widened. Then he nodded slowly. "Yeah, that tracks." The door opened. Richard stood there in what Diana recognized as the uniform of the successful man in tech. Dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, an expensive watch. His face was composed, but there were shadows under his eyes that seemed permanent. "Ms. Johnson, thank you for coming." He stepped aside. "Please." The office was smaller than Diana had expected, though the view was spectacular. What caught her attention was the wall opposite the windows, covered not with awards or diplomas, but with children's artwork. Paintings, drawings, a few photographs. And in the center, a large portrait of Lucas, painted in vibrant acrylics, his wheelchair rendered in shades of gold. "My late wife encouraged art as expression," Richard said, following her gaze. "Turns out our son is talented." "He is," Diana agreed, studying a painting of a bird with an absurdly long neck. "That's joy on a canvas." Something in Richard's face softened for just a moment, then snapped back to business. He moved to his desk, opened a folder, and pulled out a document. "I did my research," he said. "Le Cordon Bleu, graduated with honors. 3 years working in Michelin-starred restaurants in New York. Then you disappeared. 5 years later you're running a kitchen at the Sterling Club." He looked up. "What happened?" "Life. I'm offering you a job, Ms. Johnson. I'd like a better answer than that." Diana smiled without humor. "With respect, Mr. Montgomery, you haven't offered me anything yet. You summoned me here like an employee you already own." Richard's jaw tightened. "I'm prepared to pay you $150,000 a year to be Lucas's music therapist. Private instruction 3 times a week, flexible schedule. You'd also consult on the adaptive music curriculum I'm developing for the school he attends." The number hung in the air between them. It was more than Diana had made in the past 3 years combined. "No," she said. Richard blinked. "Excuse me. I don't work for people who are ashamed of their own children." The words landed like a slap. Richard's face went white, then red. "How dare you?" "Your son has cerebral palsy," Diana continued, her voice calm but unyielding. "He uses a wheelchair. These are facts, not shameful secrets. But Friday night, when he did something brave, when he reached out to connect with another human being through music, you called it a condition and apologized to a room full of strangers. You don't understand the pressure." "I understand perfectly." Diana stood. "You've spent your entire career fighting to be taken seriously, to prove you deserve every dollar you've made. You've had to be ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. And somewhere along the way, you started believing that anything that makes you seem vulnerable, including a son who doesn't fit the mold, is a liability." Richard's hands were shaking. "Get out." "Gladly." Diana moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Montgomery, your son doesn't need a music therapist. He needs a father who isn't ashamed to be seen with him. She was at the door when Richard's voice stopped her, barely above a whisper. I'm not ashamed of him. Diana turned. Richard was still standing by his desk, but his perfect posture had crumbled. His shoulders curved inward, his head bowed. I'm terrified for him, he said. Every day I wake up and I'm terrified. This world doesn't make space for children like Lucas. It doesn't make space for anyone who doesn't fit the narrow definition of normal. And I'm scared that if I can't protect him, can't make him blend in, can't smooth over every awkward moment. He looked up and his eyes were haunted. Then he'll face cruelty I can't shield him from. The same cruelty that took his mother from us. Diana's expression softened slightly. What happened to her? Cancer. 2 years ago. Richard's voice cracked. She was the one who never tried to hide Lucas's disability, who celebrated it even, who taught him to be proud of who he was. And when she died, I didn't know how to do that. So I tried to protect him the only way I knew how. By making him invisible. That's not protection, Diana said gently. That's erasure. Richard nodded, defeated. The West Oakland Community Center. The card you gave us. What is it? A place where kids don't have to be invisible, Diana said. Where different is just different, not wrong. Richard wiped his eyes roughly. If I brought Lucas, would you really let him join the program? Mr. Montgomery, I'd be honored to have him. Richard, he said quietly. My name is Richard. The West Oakland Community Center occupied a converted warehouse 2 blocks from the BART station. The outside was tagged with colorful murals, and the inside smelled like industrial cleaner, fresh paint, and possibility. When Richard pulled up that Saturday morning, he sat in his car for a full 5 minutes, watching through the window as children streamed inside. Children of every shade, every background, many with visible disabilities. Wheelchairs, crutches, prosthetics, guide dogs. In the back seat, Lucas was already unbuckling himself. Dad, come on. Richard got out, helped Lucas into his chair, and followed his son inside. The main room had been converted into a music studio. Instruments lined the walls, guitars, keyboards, drums, a battered upright piano. About 20 children sat in a semicircle, and at the center stood Diana, now in jeans and a faded t-shirt, holding an acoustic guitar. She looked up as they entered, and her face split into a genuine smile. Lucas. You came. Lucas wheeled himself forward, suddenly shy. I brought my dad. I can see that. Diana set down her guitar and approached them. Richard. Welcome. Thank you for having us, Richard said formally. A woman emerged from the side office, mid-60s, white, with steel-gray hair and the kind of face that had seen everything and judged nothing. You must be Lucas's father. I'm Dorothy Sullivan. I run this place. She held out a hand. Diana told us about you. Richard shook it, bracing for judgment. I imagine she did. She said your son has excellent taste in music and asked if we had room for one more student. Dorothy smiled. We always have room. The class began with warm-ups, simple vocal exercises that had all the children humming, then singing nonsense syllables. Lucas joined in tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. Richard watched from a folding chair along the wall, his phone in his lap, forgotten. He watched Diana move through the room, offering gentle corrections, celebrating small victories, adapting her approach for each child's needs without making a show of it. A boy with Down syndrome who couldn't quite match pitch was encouraged to focus on rhythm instead. A girl with a cochlear implant was given visual cues alongside audio ones. A teenager with severe anxiety was allowed to sing from behind a screen until he felt comfortable. And Lucas, his Lucas, was glowing. After class, while the children grabbed snacks, Dorothy sat down next to Richard. First time? She asked. That obvious. Parents always look shell-shocked their first day, like they can't believe such a place exists. Dorothy pulled out a folder. Let me guess. You've spent years fighting with schools, with insurance companies, with therapists who all have different opinions about what your son needs. You're exhausted from advocating for him in every space he enters. And somewhere along the way, you stopped believing that there could be a place where he'd just be welcome. Richard's throat tightened. How did you know? Because that's every parent's story here. Dorothy opened the folder, showing Richard photos and documents. Diana started this music program 3 years ago. Before that, she was working in fine dining, making decent money. Then her younger brother had a severe accident. He was only 19, left with a traumatic brain injury and partial paralysis. Diana moved back to Oakland to take care of him, and she watched him go through the hell of rehabilitation in a system that treats people like broken things to be fixed. Richard looked across the room at Diana, who was now teaching Lucas a simple melody on the piano. She started researching adaptive music therapy, Dorothy continued. Found out that music engages parts of the brain that physical therapy alone can't reach. Her brother made incredible progress. But Diana realized that most families can't afford private music therapy, and most music programs aren't equipped for students with disabilities. So she started this. While working as a chef, Richard said quietly. While working 2 jobs, actually. Chef at night, music teacher in the morning, and caring for her brother in between. Dorothy closed the folder. She's never asked for recognition. Never applied for grants or sought media attention. She just shows up, week after week, and changes lives. Richard watched Lucas laugh as he hit a wrong note, and Diana turned it into a joke, playing a ridiculous series of wrong notes that had all the nearby children giggling. I offered her $150,000 to be Lucas's private therapist, Richard said. I heard. I also heard you got turned down. Dorothy smiled. Diana doesn't believe in private miracles. She believes in community transformation. What does this place need? Richard asked suddenly. Excuse me. Richard turned to face Dorothy directly. I build companies. I solve systemic problems with strategic investment. If you could have anything at all, what would make the biggest difference? Dorothy studied him carefully. Are you asking as a guilty father trying to buy redemption, or as someone who actually wants to help? I'm asking as someone who just realized he's been fighting the wrong battles, Richard said. I've spent years trying to make the world accept my son by making him seem more normal. But that's not the answer, is it? The answer is building spaces where different doesn't need to be fixed. Dorothy pulled out another folder, this one thick with documents, proposals, and architectural drawings. We have a plan to expand. A real facility with adaptive technology, multiple classrooms, a performance space, housing for visiting artists. We'd serve 300 kids instead of 50. We've applied for every grant, pitched to every foundation. We've been rejected 23 times. May I? Richard held out his hand for the folder. As he read, his venture capitalist brain kicked into gear. The proposal was solid but undersold. The budget was reasonable but incomplete. The vision was beautiful but needed better articulation for people who spoke the language of ROI and impact metrics. This is good, he said finally. But I can make it better. Give me 2 weeks. Richard Montgomery didn't do anything halfway. Over the next 2 weeks, he deployed the full force of his network. He reworked the proposal with the precision of someone pitching to venture capitalists. He built a financial model that showed sustainable growth. He created a presentation that would make even the most cynical investor see the value. Not just the social value, but the economic impact of keeping kids engaged, healthy, and out of more expensive intervention programs later. Then he did something he'd never done before. He made it personal. On a Friday night, he rented out a performance space in downtown San Francisco and invited every tech executive, foundation head, and philanthropist he knew. The invitation was simple. An evening of music and possibility. Lucas was terrified. Dad, I can't perform in front of all those people. You don't have to perform, Richard assured him. Just be yourself. Diana was skeptical when Richard called to propose the idea. This feels like using the kids, she said bluntly. This is giving the kids a platform, Richard countered. There's a difference. No one's asking them to be inspirational. We're just letting them show what they can do. The night of the event, Richard stood backstage watching the audience file in. The same type of people who filled the Sterling Club, who saw the world through spreadsheets and success metrics. He felt a familiar anxiety rising. Then Lucas wheeled up beside him. "Dad, are you nervous?" "A little," Richard admitted. "Me too." Lucas took his father's hand. "But Ms. Diana says being nervous means you care. And caring is good." The lights dimmed. Richard walked onto the stage, his heart pounding. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Most of you know me as an investor and entrepreneur, someone who deals in metrics and measurable outcomes. Tonight, I'm here as a father." He saw the shift in the audience, the way people sat up straighter, surprised. 3 weeks ago, my son did something brave. He asked a stranger to share a moment of music with him. And I, in my fear and my pride, tried to silence him. I apologized for him. I called his condition a disturbance. Richard's voice wavered. I was wrong. He gestured to the side of the stage, where Diana led the community center kids into view. "These children represent everything I've been taught to see as liability. They move differently, communicate differently, learn differently. In boardrooms and executive meetings, people like my son are reduced to statistics about healthcare costs and educational accommodations. We're taught to see difference as something to be managed, minimized, or fixed." The children arranged themselves on stage, some in wheelchairs, some with walkers, some standing, all of them wearing expressions of nervous excitement. "But here's what I've learned," Richard continued. "Difference isn't a deficit. It's data we've been ignoring. These children aren't broken versions of normal. They're teaching us that normal is a fiction, and that creativity, resilience, and joy exist in forms we've failed to recognize." He nodded to Diana, who lifted her guitar. For the next 40 minutes, the children performed. They sang in harmony and in discord, in perfect pitch and in joyful approximation. They played instruments in traditional ways and in adaptations they'd invented themselves. A boy with muscular dystrophy played keyboard with a head pointer, creating ethereal melodies. A girl with autism who rarely spoke sang a solo that brought tears to eyes throughout the audience. And Lucas, his beautiful, brave son, performed a duet with Diana, a song they'd written together about birds who flew in their own way. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It was transcendent. When the performance ended, the audience rose to their feet. But Richard noticed something more important than applause. He saw faces transformed. These hardened business people, these gatekeepers of capital, were seeing something they'd never seen before. He returned to the stage. "The West Oakland Community Center has a plan to expand this program," he said, "to serve 300 children instead of 50, to create a model that can be replicated across the country. They need funding. They need support. But more than that, they need us to recognize that investing in programs like this isn't charity, it's intelligence." He pulled up a slide showing economic data, retention rates, long-term health outcomes. Every dollar invested in adaptive arts programs returns $7 in reduced healthcare costs and increased workforce participation over a lifetime. These children aren't burdens on the system. They're untapped potential that we've failed to cultivate. Another slide. Testimonials from parents, educators, medical professionals. But beyond the data, there's this simple truth. We're all one accident, one diagnosis, one unexpected turn away from being the ones who need spaces like this. Disability isn't something that happens to other people. It's part of the human experience. And a society that doesn't make room for all expressions of humanity is a society that's failing all of us. He looked at Lucas, who was glowing in the stage lights, surrounded by his new friends. 3 weeks ago, I was ashamed to let my son be fully seen. Tonight, I'm asking you to see him, to see all of them, and to invest in a future where they don't have to fight for every inch of space they occupy in this world. The silence that followed was different from the silence at the Sterling Club. This was the silence of people recalibrating their understanding. Then, from the back of the room, someone stood. A man Richard recognized. Marcus Webb, founder of one of the most successful venture funds in the Bay Area. "Mr. Montgomery," he said, his voice carrying across the space. My daughter has Down syndrome. She's 15. I've spent her entire life trying to find programs that see her as more than a diagnosis. How much do you need? Richard felt his throat close. The full budget is $2.3 million for the first phase. I'll commit $500,000, Marka said. Who's joining me? Hands went up across the room. 4 months later, groundbreaking began on the new West Oakland Community Art Center. The design, created in consultation with disability advocates and the kids themselves, featured universal accessibility as aesthetic choice, not afterthought. Ramps curved like musical staffs. Tactile surfaces created visual art. The performance space could be configured for any combination of mobility needs, sensory sensitivities, and communication styles. Richard had restructured his investment portfolio to make this his primary focus, much to the shock of his partners. But for the first time since his wife's death, he was building something that wasn't about returns or market share. He was building a space where his son, and children like him, would be welcomed not despite their differences but because of them. On a Tuesday afternoon, he found Diana in what would become the main music studio, testing the acoustics. "It's good," she said, playing a few notes on her guitar. "Better than good. The sound engineer you brought in knew what he was doing. He'd better for what I'm paying him." Richard smiled. "How's your brother?" "Doing well. He's actually talking about teaching a class here if you can believe it. Painting maybe, or poetry." Diana set down her guitar. "Richard, I need to ask you something." "Okay. Why did you do all this? And don't say it's for Lucas. This is bigger than one child, even your own." Richard walked to the window, looking out at the Oakland skyline. "When my wife was dying, she made me promise something. She said, 'Don't let Lucas become invisible because you're afraid of what people will think. Don't teach him that his worth depends on how closely he resembles everyone else.'" He turned back to Diana. "I broke that promise. For 2 years, I broke it every single day. I was so busy protecting him from the world's cruelty that I became the source of it. And now I realize that I survived losing her, but I never healed from it. And I was teaching Lucas that hiding is the same as healing." He gestured to the space around them. "This is my healing. This is me saying that the world that told me my son was less than, that his needs were burdens, that world was wrong. And I'm not going to let it tell him the same lies." Diana nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, you're doing a good job of not letting your grief define your son's future." "I'm trying." Richard pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Which brings me to this. It's a contract. I'm starting a foundation focused on disability arts and accessibility. I want you to be the executive director." Diana took the envelope but didn't open it. "Richard. It pays $180,000 a year. Full benefits, budget for staff. You'd have complete creative control over programming. The only requirement is that you expand the model, train other teachers, create curriculum, help other communities build centers like this one. You're really serious about this." "Diana, watching you teach has taught me something about leadership I never learned in business school. Real leadership isn't about controlling outcomes. It's about creating conditions where people can discover their own power." He smiled. "I'm a good builder. But you're a better leader. This work needs both of us." Diana opened the envelope, scanned the contract, then looked up with shining eyes. "I accept. On one condition." "Name it. Your son gets to name the foundation." Richard laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Deal." The foundation was named Songbird Collective, after Lucas's favorite thing to draw. Within 2 years, it had funded 12 similar programs across the country. Within 5, it had become the leading model for adaptive arts education, with research backing up what Diana had always known, that creativity and expression were as essential to human development as any medical intervention. Richard continued to run his investment firm but restructured it around different values. He became known not just as a successful investor but as someone who asked different questions. Who's being left out? What perspectives are we missing? How can we build for the margins instead of the middle? Lucas grew up in a world that still wasn't perfect, that still had barriers and biases and people who didn't understand. But he grew up knowing that difference was not diminishment, that accommodation was not weakness, and that the spaces we create reflect the world we believe is possible. On the 5-year anniversary of the center's opening, they held a concert. Lucas, now 15, performed a piece he'd composed himself, a complex, beautiful thing that wove together multiple voices and instruments, some traditional, some adapted, some invented by the students themselves. Richard sat in the audience next to Diana and her brother, watching his son conduct an ensemble of young people who'd been told, in 1,000 small ways, that they didn't belong in spaces like this. "Thank you," he whispered to Diana. "For what?" "For seeing him when I was blind." Diana shook her head. "You weren't blind. You were scared. There's a difference." On stage, Lucas lifted his hands, and the music swelled, imperfect, glorious, undeniably alive. In a world that often measures worth by narrow standards of productivity and perfection, that mistakes difference for deficiency and accommodation for weakness, true transformation happens not through grand gestures but through single moments of choosing compassion over comfort. It happens when a chef sees a child reaching out and decides that her dignity is worth more than her job security. When a father realizes that protecting his child means changing the world, not changing his child. When a community decides that inclusion isn't a favor but a foundation, not an accommodation but an expectation. The real revolution isn't in the programs we build or the money we raise. It's in the daily practice of seeing each other fully, of making space not just for people who move through the world easily, but for those who've been told they move wrong, speak wrong, exist wrong. Because the truth that privilege teaches us to ignore is this: we are all, at different moments in our lives, the ones who need grace. And a world that extends grace only to those who've never needed it is a world that has forgotten what it means to be human. The Sterling Club still exists, still serves champagne on crystal, still hosts the powerful and the privileged. But these days, if you listen carefully between the clink of glasses and the murmur of important conversations, you might hear something new. The echo of a little boy's brave question, and the gift of a stranger's compassionate answer, rippling out in waves that are still, even now, changing everything.